Well, good morning. My name is Mike Sypult. I'm a railroad historian from Rogers. Grew up riding my bicycle down to the Frisco Railroad tracks from a very young age. And since that time, I have enjoyed everything about railroads, from model railroading to railroad history to railroad photography. And I'm a member of the Arkansas Boston Mountains chapter of the National Railway Historical Society. We meet once a month in Springdale at the Shiloh Museum of Ozark History. Except for the next couple of months, we will not be meeting there because next Thursday we're meeting in Decatur, Arkansas at the restored Kansas City Southern 1911 depot in Decatur, and that's at 6 o'clock, and that program is open to the public. So, and then for the month of July, we will not be meeting, but we'll pick it back up in August. So every third Thursday at 6:30, we meet to have a railroad history presentation, and the public is invited. I think they put out some brochures about the National Railway Historical Society and our chapter, and so feel free to look at those. Today, I want to talk to you about the railroad history of Fayetteville. Now, you may think, well, we know there's a train that runs through Fayetteville, but actually, back in the day, Fayetteville was quite a booming railroad place, as you'll see in this presentation. I want to begin by just showing you a few photos of Fayetteville over the time, and I apologize, this is not the best resolution photo in the world. But May 27th, 1939, there was a photographer that got up on the West Lafayette Avenue Bridge that bridges over the tracks and took this picture. And I just want to show you over time how Fayetteville has changed. In 1940, they ran a special coal train out of Fort Smith to St. Louis with Sebastian County coal. And this is the train, again, from that same vantage point, the West Lafayette Bridge. In 1964, my late friend Mike Condren took a photo of a Frisco northbound freight train from Fort Smith coming through, again, from the bridge. My friend Steve Roberts, who lives here in Fayetteville, took this picture of some Frisco engine consists that were parked at the Fayetteville Depot. And by the way, that is Dixon Street in the distance, and those are the Hillcrest Towers that you see. In the background, the Hillcrest Towers were fairly new at that time, I understand. In 1983, Steve Roberts took this photo. You can start now to see a bit of a decline. You can see all the different tracks, the main line on the right, and then some freight house track and a passenger train track in the middle. And then the line to the left we're going to be talking about was one of the oldest branch lines built in Fayetteville for a railroad called the Pacific and Great Eastern. By 1985, another railroad had taken over the old Frisco called the Burlington Northern, and you can see there's still a little bit of activity from the West Lafayette Bridge. And you can see in 1989, by then the Arkansas and Missouri Railroad had taken over, and they were introducing a concept by borrowing some passenger cars from the Eureka Springs in North Arkansas. In Eureka Springs, they actually had to truck these cars to Fayetteville, put them back on the track again, and they were introducing a concept of a proposed excursion train or dinner train, which still runs today. I took these photos while teaching at the University of Arkansas. I would run down to West Lafayette and get some pictures. July 2005, October 2005, you can see the changes now as the railroad has sold off some of the real estate, parking lots being put in. And then just a few days ago, I went back to the West Lafayette Bridge and took these photos showing the development, the big parking garage now, and all the development that has since gone on, leaving just the single track, and you can still see the depot and the old freight house in the distance. So, this is the railroad history of Fayetteville, and I want to give you a little background. How did the railroads get here? Well, let's go back to the 1850s. You can see on this map, in 1850, the state legislature of Missouri chartered the Pacific Railroad Company. And it would have two lines. You can see yellow would run from St. Louis through towns on the Missouri River up to Kansas City. The second railroad line, which you see is red on the map, which would end up being our line here, would run from St. Louis along what they called the Springfield Road to Springfield, Missouri. The second line, that short red line that you see, was also known as the Southwest Branch or the Southwest Pacific. By 1860, you can see the Southwest Branch, the red line, had extended now to Rolla, Missouri. And then by 1865, you can see the Pacific Railroad was completed to Kansas City, and the Southwest Branch now is completed to Lebanon, Missouri. By 1870, the Southwest Pacific was bought by the South Pacific Railroad Company. That would change names, change hands early on. In 1868, the South Pacific was completed to Springfield, Missouri in 1870. And almost everyone in the city and Greene County was there to see it, a huge crowd. Now, where the story comes to us is around 1876, the South Pacific was, well, actually in 1870, the South Pacific was bought by the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad Company. The line that we see red on the map was continued into Oklahoma Territory. In 1876, the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad Company was bought by the St. Louis and San Francisco Railroad Company, headquartered in St. Louis, with hopes and visions and dreams to build to San Francisco, which never happened. But this company was known as the Frisco, and the line ran from St. Louis through Springfield into Indian Territory. And by 1881, the Frisco continued, the red line continued west to Veneta into Indian Territory until Congress restricted further westward expansion. So the Frisco management, they saw several attractions in this place called Northwest Arkansas. The general manager you see pictured here, C.W. Rogers, Captain Charles Worthington Rogers, was attracted by the prospect of through freights to Texas. And the Frisco director pictured here, Joseph Seligman, saw Northwest Arkansas as, and I quote, rich in tobacco and timber stores without an outlet. So the railroads would be a huge way to have a way to ship those goods. The once thriving tobacco industry, believe it or not, located in Benton County, peaked around 1880 and disappeared around 1898. President Edward Winslow, pictured here, wanted to build to the booming health resort of Eureka Springs, and of course that did happen, not directly by the Frisco, but by a railroad called the Eureka Springs Railroad. So on July 9th, 1880, grading began 5 miles east of Pierce City, Missouri, at a town called Plymouth, Missouri, which is now known as Monette, Missouri. And that line started south. So just to give you a big overview of railroad development west of the Mississippi River, it only totaled 1,480 miles in 1860, and only 38 miles was built in Arkansas, and that was over by West Memphis, Arkansas. By 1870, railroad construction in the Southwest had resumed after the Civil War, and mileage had increased to 2,613 miles. Arkansas now had a whopping 86 miles of track in the state. By 1880, you can see now the area had this whole area had 28,000 miles of track in operation, and then by 1890, you can see the line has been built through Northwest Arkansas. I highlighted in yellow. A major driver behind this line was Captain Charles Warrington Rogers. He was from Exeter, New Hampshire. He was orphaned at age 10. He went to sea at age 15, sailing around Cape Horn to reach California the next year. He later became captain of a merchant ship called Winfield Scott, on which he circumnavigated the globe. In 1863, he married Mary Shaw, the daughter of Tristram Shaw of New Hampshire, and then he joined the Union forces in the Civil War that same year. He was appointed acting ensign and commander of the gunboat Hydrangea, and remained in service until November 1865, participating in naval operations in Charleston, South Carolina. He returned to trade before coming to Missouri in 1871 as an employee of the Atlantic and Pacific Railroad, predecessor to the Frisco Railroad. And then he became general manager of the Frisco in May 1879, was elected second vice president in March 1881, then elected first vice president in 1883, and was a director of the Continental Bank of St. Louis and a member of the St. Louis Club, Commercial Club, and the St. Louis Club. Interesting story about him. He's the guy that managed the construction of the line to Northwest Arkansas. In fact, when the first train arrived in Rogers on May 10th, 1881, of course, Rogers is named after him. He was aboard the first train. His wife, Mary, showed a special interest in her husband's namesake and used her influence and resources to help establish Rogers' first church, the Congregational Church, and its first educational facility, which was known as the Rogers Academy. Here's just another photo of that same train showing the early passengers traveled in all wood cars, heated by wood stoves, coal stoves, lighted by kerosene lamps, and often filled with cigar smoke. The trip from Fayetteville to St. Louis cost a hefty $14. You can see the original, one of the original schedules here of the Frisco's Arkansas Division, Plymouth, which is Monette, Missouri, to Fayetteville. June 8, 1881, the line reached Fayetteville. From Plymouth to Monette, Plymouth, which is now Monette, to Fayetteville by train was 3 hours and 23 minutes, 69 miles. That's an average speed of about 30 miles per hour. But prior to the trains, passengers would endure an 18-hour stagecoach ride from Pierce City to Fayetteville. So by comparison, today I looked it up, it's 77.3 miles by highway to Monette from here, and on Google Maps says by car it takes an hour and 27 minutes. So it's all relative, right? The line reached Fayetteville June 8, 1881. 2 trains arrived in North Fayetteville to initiate passenger train service. One, a short train, carried Frisco President Winslow, General Manager Rogers, and other dignitaries. The second train was a mixed passenger and freight train that carried 500 people wishing to participate in the day-long and night-long event. The train stopped in North Fayetteville as the Blue Shale Cut between Mount Nord and the Arkansas Industrial University, later University of Arkansas, was still in the process of being reduced, a huge rock cut they were still constructing. The crowd was estimated at 12,000, more than 6 times the 1,788 population of 1880 in Fayetteville. There were welcome speeches, there was a dinner, numerous toasts punctuated the event. A horse-powered merry-go-round attracted many riders, and a 4-horse rig was used to move visitors about the busy town. Construction then through Fayetteville required 2 major excavation projects, a tunnel through the Boston Mountain Range at Winslow, and this deep rock cut through the center of downtown Fayetteville. A local journalist proclaimed, and I quote, "Fayetteville and Northwest Arkansas are exuberant with joy. We are entering a new era. A humdrum, the humdrum of the stagecoach is past, and we are out of the old grooves. The steam is up, the bell is ringing, and we plunge into the stirring, active scenes of the new life." Yes. Technology had come to Fayetteville, Arkansas, the iron horse and the steel rail. Well, just to show you this cut that they had to do, you can see this rock cut coming through to Dixon Street, which on the old Sanborn maps was actually called Dickerson Street. I don't know if that was an accident or if that was literally what it was called early on. But you can see the old bridges. That's the West Lafayette Bridge before the concrete bridge replaced this wooden structure in 1938. But that's the rock cut coming into the depot at Dixon Street. Well, when it comes to depots, the first depot in Fayetteville was actually a small wooden structure. But larger communities, and as Fayetteville was growing, demanded larger depots. Fayetteville's first depot on Dixon Street was just a wooden structure, and they had a wooden freight house as well. It was moved to Van Buren in 1882. The first depot was lost to fire in 1897 and was replaced by this picture that you see, this depot, one-story brick and stone structure complete with a Victorian pointed tower, and was finished in 1897. This large new brick building was 180 feet long and 30 feet wide. It featured maple floors, electric lighting, and indoor toilets. And because it enjoyed substantial passenger traffic from the Arkansas Industrial University, the 20-foot wide train platform was paved with bricks. Here is a drawing of the floor plan of the second depot. The depot we currently have in Fayetteville is the third depot, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Picture postcards were really, really big in the early days of train travel. And when you were traveling by train, often when you came into a city that had a depot, they would have postcards for sale that you could purchase and then write a note to a loved one, and actually you could mail it right there on the train because the train carried the U.S. mail. So this is a real picture postcard of the second depot, the Victorian Depot in Fayetteville. Here's a 1909 Fred Harvey restaurant real picture postcard of the Fayetteville Depot, and you can see the large crowds gathering around. I tell people before there was XNA, there was the depot, and this was the place. This was where you had telegrams. This is where you had Express. Before there was FedEx and UPS, there was the American Railway Express and the Railway Express Agency. This was where you had passengers coming and going, students from the University of Arkansas coming from all points around the state and beyond. This was where you had freight, both less than carload freight and full shipments of freight. So the depot was a happening place. Telegraph service as well. So here in 1918 is a photo of the 1897 depot looking southeast. And you can see there's milk, cans, cream, and the farmers brought produce in. This was a very, very, very busy place. In 1918, here's the southeast corner of the second 1897 Fayetteville Depot, photo taken from Dixon Street, and you can see, I love to study these photos because you can see a lot of detail regarding the old Coca-Cola sign on the building to the far left, the old trucks bringing in shipments to be shipped by rail, the boxcars on the right where they would load their shipments. And here is another photo, this one from the northeast side of that same depot. And you can see that car that has the W on it there is actually a refrigerated car. It would be what they called an ice bunk reefer car. They would put big, huge chunks of ice from the roof down into either end of the car, and then air circulation would keep the produce cooled until they could get it to market in, let's say, St. Louis. Here, another picture of the 1897, the second depot. This is before 1927 when the new depot was built. It's interesting, they're holding posters that say University of Arkansas X-ray boosters, X-ray boosters. And then another sign says X-ray square deal we stick. So there's a story behind that I don't know, but you can see there's the Arkansas University, at least a portion of their band with the old horns and whatnot in this photo. By 1881, the Frisco had reached the riverport town of Van Buren. Actually, on November 15th, 1882 is when they reached it. They had to cross the Boston Mountains. They had to build a tunnel through Winslow. And then they had to confront this thing called the Arkansas River. A 1,798-foot iron and steel railroad bridge linked Van Buren to Fort Smith opened on February 9th, 1886. And so the 303-mile main line of the Central Division would go from now Monette, Missouri, all the way down to Paris, Texas. And it got to Paris and opened up on July 1st, 1887. Here we see an old passenger timetable where passengers, the public, could get these public timetables and see the schedule of the trains and when the trains come, when the trains go, if they're on time. And then we see an ad that the Frisco line on or about June 1st, 1887 will be completed in operation between Fort Smith, Arkansas and Paris, Texas. It was significant that they went to Paris because they connected with with what would become later a branch of the Santa Fe Railroad, which would then go down to Galveston. And Galveston, at that time, prior to the catastrophic 1900 hurricane, Galveston was a big destination spot for the people coming out of St. Louis. So you had everything from very wealthy people coming by train through Fayetteville to Galveston. Presidents of the United States came through. It was a big deal, this line. And I mentioned earlier that the trains had a post office aboard the train. It's called the Railway Post Office, or RPO. And if you look closely at this old 1915 postcard, the cancellation stamp on it shows, it says Monette in Paris. That's the Railway Post Office, train number 3 on the Frisco. And this one was dated November 8th, 1915. So the U.S. mail went by rail. That was another big reason why the depot is so important in our story today. By 1941, the Frisco had expanded to, they mention here 5,048 miles, I believe 9 different states. And you can see they had bought some existing railroads, and now we go all the way far south as Pensacola, all the way far north as Kansas City, all the way far west as Floydada, Texas, and of course the hub in St. Louis. But you can see our division that comes off of Monette, goes through Rogers, Fayetteville, Van Buren, Fort Smith, down to Hugo, Oklahoma, and then terminates at Paris, Texas. Just zooming in, the 3 major cities that I mentioned on this route were Monette. They had a big roundhouse there and yards where they would service the locomotives. Fayetteville was big because, and as we'll see in the presentation, they went all kinds of different directions. And then Paris down at the bottom. Now, what about Fayetteville? Well, actually, for a brief period of time, for about 6 years, from 1912 to 1918, you could travel by train from Fayetteville 5 different directions. You could go west to Muskogee and Okmulgee, Oklahoma. You could go east to St. Paul and Pettigrew, Arkansas. You could go northwest to Rogers and Siloam Springs. And you could go on the main line north to St. Louis or south to Paris, Texas. And then, like I said, connect with a train to Dallas or to Galveston. Well, the depot needed a remodel, and here's an architectural drawing about probably in the early 1920s of a proposed addition to the depot. Finally, in 1926, they began construction. Here's some construction workers at the depot in 1926, and they didn't tear down the old Victorian so much as they remodeled it into a mission-style revival depot, which you can still see today on Dixon Street. So this is the 1926 remodel. Elements of the 1897 depot were incorporated into rebuilding this into a southwestern style, similar to other depots in the area. It's very popular in the 20s, this style. It was initially painted white over the exterior of the depot. It featured red roof tiles. They opened up a separate freight house as well that was built in 1925. The depot was a combination passenger freight facility. But what's kind of sad, the timing of this new depot might have been not the best, because the mainline trains of 1926, when this remodel was finished, dropped to just 2 trains in March 1933, and that would remain true until the cessation of passenger train service in 1965 through here on the Frisco. But here's a really neat picture in the 1930s. We have a 462 locomotive 1047 making a station stop at Fayetteville with train number 703 called the Texas Limited. This was a scene you could see all around America at this time in the 1930s. Here's another, click twice. Here's another picture. This one taken on July 21st, 1939 at Fayetteville by a railroad buff named John Fink. This is a 280 consolidation, number 1343. The locomotive was built in 1912. But if you look over at the right portion of this picture, you will see a newsstand. This was called the Fred Harvey Newsstand at the Fayetteville Depot. They sold magazines, newspapers, cigars, postcards, pennants, you name it. They had all kinds of neat things passengers could hop off and buy. The train that ran through Northwest Arkansas was a connection to a Frisco train, a named train called the Meteor. Now, the main Meteor train, and again, it was all back in the day built on speed. This is how the railroads competed with other railroads. As we have the faster train, we have the more direct route. The Meteor was a train that really ran from St. Louis to Oklahoma City and a little bit beyond. We had the connecting train that ran from Paris, Texas, up to Monette, where it connected with the Meteor, typically in the middle of the night, and you could ride either east to St. Louis or west to Oklahoma City. Here's a picture of a whole bunch of University of Arkansas students around 1935 gathered at the depot. And you can see by the sheer numbers, the platform extended all the way north from Dixon Street all the way up to West Lafayette Bridge. And they're lining up, they're either getting off or getting on the train here. And I showed this picture earlier. This is really interesting. I'll tell you a little story about this, and it's a very rare color slide from 1940. You don't see too many color photos. On July 8th, the Fort Smith Times-Record reported that 500 men were working down in Sebastian County in the Hackett, Bonanza areas to supply an order of 2,000 tons of coal placed by the Binkley Coal Company of St. Louis. The paper mentioned that 2,500 family members were benefiting from this coal mining employment. The order was most welcome as the area had suffered from high unemployment. The Frisco also announced that it would marshal 75 to 80 steel-sided coal cars, which you see in the picture there, at Fort Smith to accommodate the new traffic. On Wednesday, July 10th, 1940, the St. Louis Board of Education announced an order for an additional 16,000 tons of Fort Smith region coal furnished to St. Louis to the Binkley Coal Company. The Thursday morning paper carried a front page headline, Coal Celebration, Friday morning. So here's when this picture was taken. On Friday, July 12th, it was a bright and clear day. At the Fort Smith Frisco Depot, there were engines lined up with the cars of St. Louis-bound coal. At 9:45 a.m., the Fort Smith Senior High School band assembled and marched down Garrison Avenue, accompanied by a fleet of automobiles and an escort of state, county, and city police. Fort Smith factories and Frisco locomotives sounded whistles to mark the parade's 10 a.m. arrival at the depot. At the depot, now we're talking about the depot on Garrison Street in Fort Smith. It's still there, by the way. A program of speeches by local railroad, union, and coal and Chamber of Commerce officials took place. Mrs. Harold Alter, wife of Fort Smith manager of the Binkley Coal Company, smashed a bottle of Mississippi River water across one engine to mark the event. The public was invited to inspect the trains. The sounding of locomotive whistles and bells competed with the firing of aerial bombs at the event end. Cars from the three trains were assembled into this one train. An airplane circled overhead as it waited to take aerial photos of the train as it passed through the Ozarks. At Chester, Arkansas, in the Boston Mountains, the train stopped while a rear-end helper engine was added to assist the train up the difficult grade to Winslow. The helper cut off at Winslow and drifted rear end first back to Chester. And later that afternoon, the train, now a doubleheader, stopped in Fayetteville, where this photo was captured. The coal reached St. Louis on July 13th. The same day, the Missouri Pacific decided it would not match the Frisco's $2 rate on trainload coal movements from Fort Smith. So that's a little history of that very, very rare and classic photo. Here's a southbound train, 1947, coming around the curve into the Dixon Street Depot. You can see by now the West Lafayette Bridge is concrete. This was replaced in 1938. It's still there. 1960, my late friend Mike Condren took this photo of a southbound freight train going under the West Lafayette Bridge. So now, what I want to talk to you about now are the railroads. The railroads. There were 5 railroads built in Fayetteville over time. The first was called the Pacific and Great Eastern Railway that was operated from 1885 to 1893. You know, the 1880s were a time of enthusiasm and ambition. Obviously, you can see by the way this railroad is named, it never came close to the Pacific Ocean. It never came close to the Great Eastern. In fact, this railroad never exceeded 8 miles. It was chartered on January 4th, 1883. The Missouri-backed railroad planned to build 40 miles from Cottonwood Point, Missouri on the Mississippi River to the St. Francis River. An Arkansas railroad of the same name was chartered May 20th in 1884 to build from the St. Francis River across northern Arkansas to the town of Cincinnati in Washington County on the border of Washington County and Indian Territory. The planned railroad was capitalized at $6,887,000. It would span 350 miles. Work was to begin September 4th, 1884, and it was to be completed within 7 years, according to their report. Well, as I said, this never happened, and the 1889 Poor's Manual of Railroads said the company was chartered on May 20th, 1884 to build from Cottonwood Point to Indian Territory line, a total of 275 miles. The citizens of Fayetteville, urged on by Nebraska promoters, with difficulty raised $25,000 in April 1884. That's a lot of money in 1884 to pay for a roundhouse, machine shop equipment, and 15 miles of standard gauge track from Fayetteville to the border at Madison County. So as the local promoters were celebrating the event, they discovered a fundraising shortfall of $2,500, causing the Fayetteville Sentinel newspaper to characterize the emergency fundraising meeting as the P&GE Minstrel and Dramatic Company. By the way, I'll go back to that slide. You can see they only had a few stops: Fayetteville, Buckner, Riverside, and Wyman. Never got any further than Wyman, so locals refer to it as the Wyman Line. Here they're shown just barely on the map. This is it right here, the grandiose Pacific and Great Eastern. The 7.25 miles from Fayetteville to Wyman on the White River were graded by June 1885. The road had 100-foot wide right-of-way, much of which was donated. It had 1,500 feet of bridges and culverts that could not be completed due to a lack of timber, and that caused a problem initially. Their rail was extremely light and weighed a spindly 45 pounds to the yard. The rails were made of cheaper iron rather than the more reliable steel. But regardless, service to Wyman probably began in late 1885. The 7.25 mile required 1 hour each way, a prudent practice given the light track. Here's a July 1908 Sanborn fire insurance map. People will often ask, where did these railroads run? Because Fayetteville's had a lot of development, and where were these tracks? Well, I'll just show you just a little bit here to help you understand. This is West Dickerson Street, according to the map. We know it as Dixon Street. The depot is going to be right here, the current depot, okay? There was a track that went behind the depot. This was the old Pacific and Great Eastern, and they came down to basically MLK, where they went and turned south and east, okay? So this is the old P&GE line coming out of Fayetteville. Here's the National Cemetery to give you some perspective. This is a picture my friend Mike Condren took back in 1963. That line you see ran right down West Street, right in front of what would be the Walton Art Center today. They had cabooses back then. The conductor, the rear brakeman would often hang out in the caboose. They could do paperwork in there, and some cabooses were assigned where if they went somewhere overnight, they actually slept in the caboose. They had a stove in the caboose where they could prepare food. The caboose was a big deal. The cupola on top of the caboose was where they could look out over the train. to see if there were any problems with the wheels. Sometimes we had what was called friction-bearing trucks, and sometimes they would get hot in what we call hot boxes, so they were looking for smoke or any dragging equipment. But anyway, that's a thing of the past, unfortunately, but that's the old caboose in Fayetteville. Here's the tracks I was mentioning. Here's the Hillcrest Tower, and you can see the spur here. This is looking south on West Avenue. There was a meatpacking house located on the spur track to the left, and the building behind the pickup truck was, I guess, the meatpacking house. The main track to the right was the old Pacific and Great Eastern, the P&GE, went past the old ice house, and then down in elevation to the Arcola sand plant. Some of you, if you've known Fayetteville for the years, you might recognize some of those things. The Fayetteville Linen Service building on the left was razed and is now the Walton Arts Center. Times have changed. Oh, by the way, I'll mention back on that slide, now this is a Frisco Trail. So if you hear the Frisco Trail in down around the Dixon Street, a lot of the old railway right-of-way is a trail now. Okay, my friend Steve Roberts, who lives here in Fayetteville, got up on top of the Hillcrest Towers and snapped this photo. And the street you see on the right is that West Avenue street. By now, of course, the tracks are gone. In the trees, right above my caption, there's a little bit of rubble of the transfer building. The ice house is gone. You can still see a little bit of the wall there. All of this scene in the lower foreground is now the Walton Arts Center parking lot. So this Wyman line, this Pacific and Great Eastern, here I tried to trace out how it ran out to Wyman, close to the White River. You can see it comes out of Dixon Street here. This was the second railroad in Fayetteville. The first railroad, of course, being this red line, the Frisco, and then it came out and went through, as you can see, to Buckner, the Buckner community, and then kind of went around. This is where the Stewart family Christmas display is now, and then headed up to the White River, across the White River, just a little bit north of the highway bridge at Riverside. That was, I guess, the Riverside Park at one time, and then into the community building of Wyman. The Riverside Park was established in 1882 with the construction of this railroad. Fun-seeking citizens rode the train to the park, where they could enjoy picnics and events as well as simple pleasures of the river. Excursions were run every day out to Wyman during the hot seasons, where there were provision for boating and swimming. A July 4th program in 1882 featured an all-day picnic. Trains were run every 2 hours to accommodate the public, and a printed program announced the speakers of the day would be the Honorable William Walker Bishop on, quote, the tariff and financial questions of the day, and Arkansas as it was and is by Uncle Ann Fitzgerald. An onion-eating contest offered prizes, while orders would be enforced by Sheriff Ike Combs. An onion-eating contest. Love it. Love these newspaper accounts are great, right? Okay, but there it is, Google Earth view, just kind of showing the line out to Wyman. Now, the land was already somewhat cultivated, so the original growth trees were gone. There wasn't a lot of business on the line. Basically, taking the mail, taking passengers out to the Riverside Park. So this railroad didn't have a good future. Here's what they were hoping to do. They were hoping to build all the way from Fayetteville over to Cincinnati Indian Territory, across the state. Of course, it would not be a straight line with all the hills, the top of the state, right? Over to Cottonwood Point on the Mississippi River. Never happened. The line only lasted a few years and was abandoned and sold. The third railroad built in Fayetteville was the Fayetteville and Little Rock Railroad. The St. Paul branch of the Frisco, as it was later known, they needed railroad ties, and there was a lot of timber to be harvested. So there was a man named Hugh F. McDaniel was behind this. On September 4th, 1886, the state of Arkansas granted a charter for the Fayetteville and Little Rock to build 150 miles of railroad from Fayetteville to Lewisburg, which is now near Morrilton, Arkansas, to connect with the St. Louis Iron Mountain and Southern. As I mentioned, it was formed by Fayetteville resident Hugh McDaniel, a former tie buyer and experienced railroad builder. The line was built west to Fayette Junction, just south of Fayetteville, into Madison County to St. Paul, where McDaniel owned sizable timber holdings. It's kind of nice to build a railroad to where your holdings are, right? The following year, he shipped out a whopping 15,000 railroad cars of mine props and ties valued at $2 million. And as it did with other competing railroads, the Fresco purchased the line, effectively owning it by 1887. Well, here's the line. Now, we saw the old Pacific and Great Eastern right here, the line that's now abandoned. Here's Fayette Junction. So here's Dixon Street right here. And you go south down toward Cato Springs Road. This is where the junction is. So they created a junction there and a Y. This is called a Y. They created a junction where they could run then out into this large area of timber to be harvested. Fayette Junction was the name of this small railroad switchyard on the south side of Fayetteville, where the Frisco Railway was intersected by this Fayetteville and Little Rock, known as the St. Paul branch. Here is a postcard of the construction, of the junction after it was constructed. Construction of this line began December 4th, 1886, when a switch was installed 1 mile south of the Frisco Depot. The spot was known, of course, as Fayette Junction. By February 1887, track was laid to Powell, which is today's Baldwin, 5 miles east of the junction. Shortly thereafter, the St. Louis-San Francisco Railroad purchased the Fayetteville and Little Rock on February 23rd, 1887, and Fayette Junction soon became a hub of the thriving lumber industry in the late 1800s, and multiple hardwood milling operations were located nearby. The Sligo Wagon Wood Company and Brown Veneer, two of the original structures that you can still see building remnants at Fayette Junction. Neighborhoods developed in the area to house all the mill workers. And from the 1930s to the 1950s, the canning industry dominated this area. Tom Hargis operated Hargis Canneries as a brokerage for approximately 30 small canneries in Washington and Madison counties. His vegetables and fruits were canned at the Sligo Mill before shipping to wholesalers. This junction began to go into decline in the 1970s as the Sligo Mill deteriorated, and City Lumber, for a time, used the Sligo Mill for storage until abandoning the site in the 1990s. Let's take a look at Fayette Junction here. This is a very rare photo that just popped up on social media from, I'm 99% certain this is a John W. Berriger III photo when he was in charge of the railroad division of the Reconstruction Finance Commission in 1935. Looking north from West Cato Springs Road is what you're seeing here. 3.5 miles south of Fayetteville, this small Frisco engine servicing facility. This was where they serviced the locomotives. Steam locomotives required water. They ran typically by coal and later by oil. And this was the place where you could see where they would service the locomotives. And some of the things that are pointed out here, the train order board, the signal, whether they had orders to stop and pick up or not. You can see the water tank here for the locomotives had a spout on this side and a spout on this side. You can see a little depot building here. You can see some old locomotives parked here, a cinder pit where they would drop the ashes from the coal-burning locomotives. And it was a Y. The significance of the Y is you could have a southbound train, for instance, come into the Y, and then he could back up on the other leg of the Y, which is over here, and effectively turn the train around, facing northbound. So they used the Y to turn around cars, to turn around trains. It was a big deal. By 1951, the steam locomotives were gone, and a diesel would sit in this spot. In fact, this is one of the very first diesels that did. This was built in 1942. It's a Davenport, little Davenport, probably a 300 horsepower, 600 horsepower locomotive. But steam locomotives were gone on the Frisco through here by 1951, leaving diesels like this to do the work. But the old water tower was there for a little while before they dismantled it, the double spout water tower, and the coaling towers. They would bring in coal cars, dump the coal cars. It would have a conveyor system that would convey the coal up to the top area of this tower, where then these chutes could be lowered as the locomotive would pull up to it, the tender behind the steam locomotive. These chutes would be lowered and the coal would fill the coal bin of the tender of the locomotive. Speaking of the locomotives, here's some very rare photos that were taken at Fayette Junction, 1915. This is a 460, what they called a 10-wheeler, coal-burning locomotive. You can see the coal in the bunker here behind the cab of the locomotive, and water, of course, was also placed in there for the boiler for the steam to be produced. Here's another 460 10-wheeler oil. This one's an oil burner. Now the way you can tell is you don't see a pile of coal here. You see a bunker. You see a cast iron box basically, and that's where they put oil in. So this was an oil burning locomotive which put out a lot less cinders and just burned a little better. Here is another photo of a 10-wheeler at the Fayette Junction, and this one of course is loaded with coal. A few years back, probably about 10 years ago, I drove out to Fayette Junction. This is what it looks like pretty much today. This is looking south from Cato Springs Road. Here's looking at the junction. You can see a leg of the Y there. You know, I have become a railroad archaeologist because a lot of this stuff is gone, and literally I have to go kick in the dirt to find things. But I find things. Here's probably part of the old coaling tower base right here, and some of the old tracks still heading out when it did head out to the Fayetteville Industrial Park, and then when it headed out also to St. Paul. Here's a Sanborn Fire Insurance map showing the junction. It just shows one leg of the Y. But notice the J.P. Brower Walnut Company manufacturers of wood veneering. So that was a huge business that employed a lot of people back in the day. So this was the St. Paul branch. If you wondered where it went, it kind of followed the White River for a while. The Little Rock was included in the corporate title because they had proposed to build to near Morrilton. Never happened. By the end of 1886, the line extended 25 miles from Fayette Junction, 2 miles south of Fayetteville on the Frisco's main line to Texas, to a town called Crosses in Madison County. The following year saw completion of another 8 miles of track to the initial terminus of St. Paul. The branch then was extended in 1897, 1898, an additional 8 miles to the timber center of Pettigrew, Arkansas. And that's as far as she got. But you can see, this is, I believe, a 1912 Frisco map that shows Fayetteville. And you go in all kinds of different directions out of Fayetteville. The St. Paul branch timetable from 1893 showing to St. Paul. Like I say, about a 35-mile long branch, followed the White River. Almost the entire route was subject to frequent floods and washouts, being right next to the river. But business was brisk, and St. Paul became a boom town. Interesting history there. One of the Frisco employees said, "I sure would like to see what the country around here looks like, but the lumber is piled so high along the tracks I can't see out the cab window." That's how busy the business was. Well, their last timetable came out, and notice if you see the little box on the right, service on this line will be discontinued after 12:01 a.m. July 1st, 1937. Of course, depression had hit, times were hard, lumber was pretty much exhausted, and actually they ran till July, I think they ran their last train July 30th of 1937. Well, that was the third railroad. Now let's talk about the fourth railroad. The fourth railroad built in Fayetteville was the Ozark and Cherokee Central. Discussions began in the 1880s about a standard gauge railroad from Fayetteville west to Indian Territory. Between 1885 and 1888, the citizens of Prairie Grove tried and failed to build a railroad 12 miles east to Fayetteville. They wanted market access for their produce via the Frisco Railroad. A second attempt occurred in 1899. They formed a paper railroad called the North Arkansas and Western Railway, made up from organizers of the two towns. They planned to build a line from Fayetteville to Prairie Grove, a distance of 12 miles. What actually happened was they changed that name of the railroad to the Ozark and Cherokee Central in April 1901, and sure enough, construction began a month later in Fayetteville. Tracks reached Prairie Grove, 13 miles west of Fayetteville, in August 1901. The 29.7-mile section from Fayetteville to the Indian Territory border was built by a subcontractor who leased more than 100 convicts from the state penitentiary in Little Rock to do the construction. The 143.9-mile Ozark and Cherokee Central consisted of three parts: the line between Fayetteville and Muskogee, the Muskogee City Bridge Company that owned a 1,100-foot steel rail and road bridge spanning the Arkansas River, and a 40-mile purchased railroad, the Shawnee, Oklahoma, and Missouri Coal and Railway Company that linked Muskogee to Okmulgee Indian Territory. Service from Fayetteville to Muskogee, the second largest city in the Indian Territory, began on February 1st, 1903. Here's schedules from 1903 on the left. Here's the schedule from the last schedule from 1942 on the right. And you can see some of the towns it went through, including Westville, Farmington, Prairie Grove, Lincoln, then Westville, Tahlequah, Fort Gibson, Muskogee, Boynton, Okmulgee. So that was the route. It ran until 1942. Again, improved roads, people with vehicles, not riding the passenger trains. A lot of stuff was being hauled by truck by then, and World War II in progress. They needed the iron for the war effort. Here's a picture of them, a construction train somewhere here in Washington County, building westward. The first train operated in Fayetteville on August 22nd, 1901. Here's a picture of it. Passenger trains first operated from the ONCC had their own little depot down around MLK, but this train is originating from the old Victorian Frisco passenger depot on Dixon Street. They used their own right-of-way downgrade to where it crossed underneath the Frisco main line on its way west. The first train arrived in Prairie Grove August 31st, 1901. The first train entered Lincoln, Arkansas on January 22nd, 1902. In late March 1902, a second rail line began operations through Westville, giving the town an enviable position as a rail junction. The end of track reached Welling on July 12, 1902. The last rail to reach the Tahlequah, Oklahoma depot was laid August 2nd, 1902. The first train arrived from Fayetteville on August 5th, 1902 with 800 passengers in 8 cars, 2 cars owned by the ONCC and 6 borrowed from the Frisco. In 1903, the Frisco worked quietly to purchase the railroad. Investors of the ONCC wondered whether being bought by the debt-heavy Frisco was to their advantage, so they commissioned a study, and it was found that the railroad's track was in terrible shape due to poor engineering, so the Frisco ownership was preferable because they would upgrade it to modern standards. Here's a picture. Whoa, my mouse pointer got a little crazy there. Here we go. Here's a picture. There's a large enlargement of it back on the table in the back here of the first train. And notice the children up on top of the boiler of a live steam locomotive. I don't know if they had a burn center in Northwest Arkansas at that time, but some of those kids probably needed it after this experience. But this was how it was in the day. Here's a train possibly going on the Muskogee Sub 1927 at the Fayetteville Frisco Depot on Dixon Street. So how did this railroad come out of town? Well, again, this is this 1908 Sanborn map. Here's Dixon. Here's the depot, Dixon. It would come, follow the old Pacific and Great Eastern route that they had built until right here. The P&GE went this way. They turned and went this way, skirting very closely to the National Cemetery, as you can see. Today, Google Earth, here is how the line would go. It would come down this way, cross over MLK, come through, you can see this is the National Cemetery, okay? And today, this is a trail called the Salagi Trail. which is the Cherokee word for Cherokee. And so it's called the Cherokee Trail. I thought, that's great. It's the old Ozark Cherokee Central Railroad. And it goes through underneath. This is the main line of the Frisco, now the Arkansas, Missouri. And it goes underneath it, and it's called the Barrett-Selby Tunnel. There's real neat artwork there. You can walk under it. It's a trail you can walk to another trail. You can go from the Frisco Trail to the Salagi Trail to the Indian Trail. And that's all basically on the old railroad. So it headed out of town. You can see here it came out of Dixon, looped around, went under the main line, and came out of town, headed to Farmington. Some remnants of it are still traceable, believe it or not. If you're going to trace it in the dead of winter, because there's so much growth now you won't see it. Where did it cross under the Frisco? Well, here it is. This shows a northbound Frisco train. You can see that big culvert underneath the locomotive. That trestle is over, the trestle to the left of the culvert there a little bit is over Town Branch, which flowed from Rocher's Pond, south of present-day Highway 62 or MLK. The residence on top of the hill was the Rocher home, where later Sunrise Manor Nursing Home was located. Here's what it looked like in 1960. My friend Mike Condren took a picture above and below. So below you can see the line heading west through the culvert. The picture on the right is from above on the Frisco main line looking down at the trestle. Another friend of mine, Jeff Cooney, took this photo when the Arkansas, Missouri was experimenting with passenger train service of a train actually going over the culvert. And today, this is what your culvert looks like. Isn't that neat? It's on the walking trail. Yeah. This was the artist that did this was Stacy Bates, and she titled this "Holding On to and Letting Go: The Struggles and Strength of the Silagi," the Cherokees. Well, how did you travel by rail on this line? Well, they initially would have had steam locomotive pulling passenger cars. Later, the Frisco purchased several efficient self-propelled gasoline electric cars known as doodlebugs to facilitate round-trip passenger service between Fayetteville and Muskogee. In terms of freight, this Oklahoma portion of the line had oil, gas, and crops like corn, oats, and cotton. Western Washington County's main marketable product was apples, later replaced by strawberries. In 1929, Farmington shipped out 47 railroad cars of apples, 55 cars of grapes, 127 cars of strawberries. The latter had a high value and a short shelf life, lasting only 5 days. So the Frisco ran special berry trains, ensuring that the crop got to market fast in refrigerated cars. In the 1930s, both passenger and freight service declined. The line operated at a loss, and there were more expenses than revenues. So shortly after the start of World War II, the railroad petitioned to abandon the line. Although some parties objected, the War Production Board decided that the route was not essential. The track was removed in 1942 and transferred to the U.S. Army and Navy to be refashioned into much-needed war materials. The fifth and last railroad, built in Fayetteville, was an extension of the grandiose named Kansas City and Memphis Railway. Never went to Kansas City, never went to Memphis. And they did an extension from Taneytown to Fayetteville. The KC&M, at its brief peak in 1914, was the largest non-Frisco railroad in northwest Arkansas, with a total of 63.9 miles of standard gauge track. The railroad was based in Rogers. It was formed in 1910. It absorbed a couple of earlier railroads, the Arkansas and Oklahoma Western Railroad, which ran from Rogers to Siloam Springs, and the Montanay Railroad, which ran from Montanay to Lowell. Here's a map of the line and their proposed extensions, which never happened. They wanted to build from Montanay down to Huntsville. Actually, it would have come out of Cave Springs to Fayetteville to Huntsville. This extension of Huntsville was never built, and of course, none of that was built. You can see the dash, because this is what they were hoping to do, and then build far west as Wagoner, Oklahoma. The line was backed by prominent Rogers banker William R. Felker. So here's the line. It was called the Fruit Belt Line, relied on apple traffic from the area near Highfield, on the Rogers to Siloam Springs main line, and traffic interchange with friendly connection to the Kansas City Southern Railway at Siloam Springs. Limited Apple traffic was likely the reason the KCM unwisely decided to build to Fayetteville. However, the Frisco fought fiercely to preserve its freight business in the Washington County seat of Fayetteville. At that time, population 1910 of Fayetteville, 4,471. 17 of the 18 Fayetteville businesses with rail sidings were served solely by the Frisco. The KCM could not obtain Fayetteville freight traffic business unless it absorbed the cost of drayage to and from the customers. In addition, the KC&M's Fayetteville terminal was more than 12 blocks from the principal business district of Fayetteville. So it was at a big disadvantage coming in late to the city. In 1917, the KC&M petitioned the Interstate Commerce Commission to require the Frisco to provide switching services so that the Fayetteville customers on Frisco sidings could have their shipments transferred to the KC&M. The Interstate Commerce Commission denied their request. They extended it to Fayetteville, but it didn't last very long. They planned their entry into Fayetteville near the fairgrounds located just outside the southwest city limits. The railroad entered Fayetteville by passing under an open Frisco trestle that ran the entire length of the large J.H. Phipps Lumber Company south of the Prairie Grove Road on Highway 62. The railroad then entered a short stretch of track on the Frisco's Muskogee subdivision before returning to home track near the Government Avenue entrance to the Fayetteville National Cemetery. The railroad did not secure a War Department permit to cross the National Cemetery property until August 24, 1912, 1 week after the railroad began operating daily mixed trains between Fayetteville and Cave Springs. So here's one of their early timetables, the only known timetable that exists still. Here's one of they actually bought a brand new locomotive from Baldwin in 1913, and on the tender of it, it said, Fruit Belt Line, I am going to Rogers, Arkansas, the fastest growing city in the great Southwest. The promoters were promoting big. So here's a picture of that same locomotive at the Rogers Depot. Then they bought this little experimental battery electric car. You know, we're into electric cars now, right? This was the railroad's entrance into the Edison battery-powered car. This was Federal Beach Company's Edison battery car number 200, arrived on the property in the spring of 1913. It was 39 feet long. It could accommodate 30 passengers plus baggage. Notice the open platform of this car. The KCS, it's a long story, but the KC&M stopped using this car when they went into receivership. It ended up resold to the Cassville and Exeter Railroad to be used as a trailer for their passenger trains. Then it became an antique store in the area and survived as an antique store until 1952. Recently, I've discovered it, the remains of it, in a field up near Joplin, Missouri. And all that's left is that platform. So I got a picture of myself on that platform. This is the man, Mr. Felker, but his dream had come to an end by World War I. Pursuant to federal district court orders, freight and passenger service on the Fayetteville extension ended in March 1918, followed by the Rogers to Siloam Springs line in October 1918. So the railroad was abandoned. It was the second largest railroad abandonment in the United States in 1918, second only to the Colorado Midland Railroad. So what's left? And I'm about to wrap up. What's left? Well, here's the railroads that were built. Just to recap, the Frisco, the Pacific and Great Eastern, abandoned in 1893. The Fayetteville Little Rock, which became the St. Paul branch, abandoned in 1937. The O&CC, Frisco's Muskogee Sub, abandoned in 1942. The KC&M, abandoned in 1918. One by one. Here is a picture of a passenger train in 1965. My friend Mike Condren was a student at the university here, and he took this picture of a passenger train. It came through at night, not late night, about 9 o'clock at night, and a nice wintry picture. So what happened to the passenger train? Well, the peak of long-distance passenger train service in this part of the United States was 1918. Then the advent of automobiles, then the advent of improved roads, and then paved roads. And then by 1927, through St. Louis, Texas passenger service ended on the Frisco. 1930, Frisco-Harvey dining car service ended between Monette and Fort Smith. By 1933, the second Monette, Texas connecting train was withdrawn from service. And so from 1933 to 1965, there was just a single daily connecting train between Monette and Paris, Texas, and that was truncated up to Fort Smith in 1958. So you couldn't even go in 1958 down to Paris anymore. So what happened? September 18th, 1965. This is at Dixon Street. Look at the crowd at the tracks. That was the last passenger train that would run through. Here it is. Stopped to pick up the mail. Here's the railway post office clerk loading U.S. mail on train 710, the connecting Meteor train. Here is, when it stopped in Rogers, you can see the same train. It was led by Frisco EMD FP7 number 4057. So, what happened? Well, we saw this picture earlier of how it used to be when the Frisco had their orange and white diesel locomotives. But on November 21st, 1980, a big change happened in Fayetteville on the railroads. The Burlington Northern Railroad, which was created on March 2nd, 1970, by the combination of some lines up north and northwest, created the Burlington Northern Railroad. They bought the Frisco and merged it in to their system on November 21st, 1980. Now, they only ran through this area until September 1st, 1986. But here's a picture. They ran some business cars down, parked them at the depot there on Dixon Street. Those would have been to entertain shippers, meet with shippers and railroad officials. And then you can see a freight train going past the depot at Dixon. And you can see they're starting to paint all the engines green. I called it gangrene because I love the Frisco. And the orange and white's going away. Here is a picture again from the Lafayette Bridge. You can see all the tracks that are in place. And let's just recap here a little bit. This is the old P&GE. The old P&GE that went down West Street and looped around. Here was where they would bring freight cars in. Here's where they would bring passenger cars in. Here's the main line. You can see by 1985, the locomotives are green. It's the Burlington Northern is operating it in 1985. The caboose went away. I miss the caboose. At the end of a train, you would always wave at the conductor in the caboose, but that's gone as well. And then in September 1st, 1986, the Burlington Northern, huge railroad, spun off this line from Monette to Fort Smith to the Arkansas, a new railroad called the Arkansas and Missouri Railroad. It's a Class 3 short line headquartered in Springdale, operates 139.5 miles of line from Fort Smith to Monette. It's now in its 38th year of operation. So their railroad, they had some older, what we call Alco locomotives that were painted in this nice little red paint scheme here. And you can see going under the Lafayette Bridge there. Here's another picture. This picture shows these rails are starting to get torn up now. The lead to the freight house. Here's a photo when they were experimenting with the whether or not to have a dining car train or an excursion train, which they do now, run excursions out of Springdale, not out of Fayetteville. Here's a picture of a train, southbound train, passing the depot in 1987. My friend Steve Roberts got another photo from the towers, Hillcrest Towers, April 20th, 1988. Sorry about that. Another photo. This is a mixed freight. They actually ran excursions with what they called a mixed train. Now, what we mean by a mixed train is these are all freight cars, but those last two cars are passenger cars. So they had the passengers at the end of the freight train. Not exactly the safest thing to do because the freight train starts and stops and throws people everywhere. So anyway, they don't run the mixed trains anymore, which is a good thing. Oh, by the way, compare these pictures. Look at this. No Walton Center parking lot. That's 1991 by 1993. Walton Center parking lot. Well, I did a few before and after photos, 1926 to 1991. There's the depot. You can still go see it today. Chipotle's, if you want to go to lunch at Chipotle's, it's there. I took these pictures July 2005. You can see they're starting to tear out tracks. By October 2005, they had paved it. This is what it looks like today. Quite different. Quite different. If you're interested in learning more, there's a book you can check out. They have it here at the library called The Railroads of Northwest Arkansas by the late Robert G. Wynn. H. Craig Minor wrote a book, The St. Louis-San Francisco Transcontinental Railroad, the 35th Parallel Project. Very interesting read if you want to learn about the larger picture of the Frisco Railroad. My friend Barton Jennings wrote this book, Arkansas, Missouri, History Through the Miles. We have a website through our chapter. It's called arcrailfan.com. There's some brochures on the table back there or in your seats. I have some cards up here if you want a copy of my card. I also created and moderate the Arkansas Railroad History page on Facebook. We'd love to have you be a part of that. Just join it. The KCS Railway History, a railroad in western Benton County, I created that as well. If y'all have any questions, I'll be glad to stick around, but I thank you for coming to today's presentation. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope it's been informative. I could speak for hours about this. There's a whole lot more, but stay tuned if you ever want to come to any of our chapter meetings. Third Thursday of the month, 6:30 p.m. at the Shiloh Museum in Springdale. Thank you. This month is exception. Decatur, Arkansas, 6 p.m. Yeah. Next Thursday.
On the average, how many boxcars of freight could they pull through the hills?
That's a good question. It depends on the time frame. It depends on the era. Because the steam locomotives were smaller at the beginning. They could pull maybe 40 at the beginning. But over time, the locomotives got larger, but so did the cars. And the cars could handle more weight.
Because I saw when you brought up about the fruit line, I actually, going through microfilm, I run across newspaper articles occasionally. I think I read across the very one you were talking about where they had a bumper crop of berries.
Yes.
And they were talking about how many, I can't remember now how many boxcars of berries they had, but I remember thinking, wow, that's a lot of berries.
Yeah. One single train back in that day, about 40 cars. Now today, they have huge, powerful locomotives. Locomotives are 3,000 to 4,000 horses each. They can hook up a string of those locomotives, and I've seen them through Decatur on the Kansas City Southern now pulling 200-car trains.
Yeah.
200 cars.
There's also the thing about the terrain, because I remember being a kid stuck at because my grandparents lived out of Oklahoma, we were going to visit them, and we got stuck at a junction for like 45 minutes just watching one train go on and on and on. We used to count the cars. I got up to like 105.
Wow.
And it just kept going
and
going.
There's a thing called precision scheduled railroading, or PSR, that they try to run as long a train as they can. It's efficient, but it's also pretty dangerous.
Well, yeah, I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
One, in the 1980s, I read an article in the Arkansas Times about the remembrances of a man who talked about the Arkansas Express. It wasn't a company, but it was a route.
Okay.
And he said it ran from Kansas City, and I think, I'm remembering way back, to Mena.
Okay, that would be on the Kansas City Southern.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was probably the name. That's probably the name they gave the train.
Yeah, it's the route. It's not.
But that's the Kansas City Southern. That's the one that goes through western Benton County, Siloam Springs, Gentry, Decatur.
Yeah. Okay. Do you have any information about that? I'm really interested in learning.
Did they call it was it the Arkansas Express, or was it the Arkansas Traveler?
What I remember is the Arkansas Express, but it could have been Traveler.
I've done years of research on the Kansas City Southern, and they did have an early train called the Arkansas Traveler, and they actually made promotional photos of it and circulated around the world. But it was called the Arkansas Traveler, and it was a train. The Kansas City Southern runs from Kansas City down to Port Arthur, Texas, on the Gulf, and so that may be what you're referring to. I have not heard Arkansas Express.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it could be, and he may have not remembered accurately. When he was a kid, his mother ran a boarding home. And so all these characters came off the train and stayed at the boarding house.
Was this in Mena?
In Mena, I believe.
Yeah.
And so then they would get up and go back, and there were circus people, there were
Oh, yes.
U.S. Marshals escorting prisoners, I mean, just all kinds of folks.
Did he write this down? Did he ever write this down?
Well, it was in the Arkansas Times, it was an article, and
Oh,
I've never
okay.
been able to find it. I've been
Oh,
looking.
wow. That
Oh,
would be great to find. Yeah.
I know, I'm gonna try to find it. The other is, I was very small when I lived in Fayetteville. So I must have been 4 years old, probably around 1961
Okay.
or 1960. And my mom, on the spur of the moment, decided to go to El Dorado and see my grandparents.
Okay.
And she decided we would take the train.
Yes.
So I got on the train, it must have been at night, because I
Right.
went to sleep and I woke up and there were my grandparents.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
was the train running from Fayetteville down to El Dorado, or would they have had to come up and meet us?
What? Well, the Frisco ran to Van Buren, where you could then connect with the Missouri Pacific.
Oh,
The
okay.
Missouri Pacific could take you to El Dorado.
Okay.
So it just depends on where you went. They could have driven up to Fort Smith to meet you.
Yeah.
So, but the Frisco did not go to El Dorado, but you could connect with the Missouri Pacific then, and it would have been kind of a circuitous route because you'd have to go to Little Rock and probably change trains. So my guess is they probably drove up to meet you.
Yeah, that probably my guess too.
Yeah.
But I was very small, 4, so I don't
Yeah.
remember clearly.
Oh, wow.
I just remember being on the train and excited.
Yes.
And going to sleep and waking up.
Yeah.
And seeing my grandparents waiting.
Oh, riding a train, it's a wonderful.
I still love to do it. I've ridden trains in different parts of the world.
Have you?
I've ridden on Amtrak.
Oh, good.
So I love trains. And
Yeah.
I've ridden the excursion
Yeah.
train here. So I encourage everyone to do it if you haven't.
Yeah.
Jump on that thing and go.
Well, consider being a member of our
I am.
chapter.
I'm gonna do it.
You've got the application right there. Yes, ma'am.
Is there fear that we will lose our depot and that part of our history?
And here in Fayetteville?
Yeah,
Well, I looked at the large-scale development plan for what they're doing down there.
Yeah.
The freight house that I referred to behind the depot, it burned recently in 2022.
Yeah.
It had Arcegas in it at one
Yeah,
point,
yeah.
and it burned. Now, that building, I don't think is on the plan, so that building may get eliminated. That was built in 1925. But the depot itself, I think it's on the National Register, and
Yeah, okay.
I,
There'd be an uproar if they did that.
I think it has a good future. It's totally crowded out now by huge structures, but it's there.
It would be nice if the freight building could have been made into a museum with all
Yes.
these pictures and tell the
Well,
story.
you know, I thought by now they would have torn it down. In fact, they're supposed to move, you know, down there where the Bank of Fayetteville was, and there's
Yeah,
a
I
passenger
love
car and a
that.
caboose.
Yeah.
They were supposed to move that, and all of it's still there. So I don't know, did they change their minds? I don't know.
Because that's a perfect for people coming into town to see.
It
that.
is.
Yeah,
It is.
wow.
Anybody else have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
It's kind of a comment. I'm originally from Little Rock, but my mom, her parents still had their farm in English till I was in high school in
Uh-huh.
Jacksonia.
Uh-huh.
And the bridge that we always take over the Little Red River, come to find out, it used to be a swing bridge.
Oh, yes, uh-huh.
And I remember Grandpa, even in his upper years, he still grew watermelons and strawberries.
Oh, wow.
And Jacksonia, we used to have a different name, but I can't remember what it is right now.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
there's a history.
Yeah, I think that's on the Missouri Pacific, Judsonia. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
remember this little, the caboose.
Oh, the caboose, you remember the caboose going
Yeah, I
by?
remember the caboose because they lived probably no further from here to that house right there from the railroad tracks. They would run all day and all night sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
And you'd sometimes see a caboose go by.
Yeah. You know, what's interesting about the swing bridges that you talk about when the railroads were built out, you know how rivers sometimes, well, often change course? And if you go to Cotter, Arkansas, they built a huge swing bridge on the White River there. But now the river has altered course, and the swing is just sitting on land that, you know, you couldn't see, why is that swing bridge there? But that's how the rivers changed, you know.
Wow.
Malcolm?
The railroads are killing themselves because they have de-emphasized service,
Oh, yes.
and they are making huge mistakes. They're short of personnel
Yeah.
to run the trains.
Mhm.
And that was, to them, oh, that was a big plus, because we're not gonna have to pay as many people. But now, you know, there are certain rules about how long crews can operate,
Mhm.
and they're running up against that and not having people to replace the crews.
Yeah. Yeah.
These people are, I hate to say it, because they're paid millions of dollars a year, but they're stupid.
Well, times have changed dramatically, and the railroads, you know, a lot of the railroads have been bought up, huge corporations, and it's true, the local customer is really forgotten now. It's mostly bulk commodities, it's coal, containers,
Right.
those kind of things. And yeah, it has certainly changed. Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, I have a similar question following up. Why those railway, corporations or railway building construction abandoned?
Why was it abandoned?
Yeah.
It just wasn't making money. It wasn't making money.
And
And
then the individual ownership, private, I don't know. And China is very different.
yes,
Yeah.
a lot of countries it's different. In
Yeah.
America, we have abandoned, it's a real scary thought. I don't know what the total percentage is United States wise, but it's well over 50% of our lines are gone now. And during like World War II in this nation, the railroads moved people and goods and kept our nation moving. Most, I say most, I'm going to say 60% of that is gone. And it's really sad because even when you think about transportation, public transportation, you know, there's been studies done here at the University of Arkansas about Northwest Arkansas maybe having, bringing back public transportation on some of the routes we talked about. But now things have been developed so much in real estate prices, and it's become staggering how much that would cost to try to get that reinstated. Yes, sir.
Well, there's a, don't want to say movement, but in organizations called Rails to Trails.
Yes, rails to trails, and you saw some trails here today.
The people, you know, say, "Oh, we can't make any money on this," you know, so they abandon it, and rather than let it be developed, they convert it to trails so people can walk and bike and stuff like that. But the idea is that someday we're going to need that.
Right.
And
Right.
rather than spend billions upon billions of dollars to get rid of development, you know, it'll be there, and you can put a railroad on it again without wasting billions of dollars.
So we make American great again.
Yes. It is. It's the rails to trails. Look it up, Google it, rails to trails, and there's lots of trails. There's one called the Katy Trail, which goes the entire width of the state of Missouri, and you can ride bikes on it and all. But it's like Malcolm said, they at least preserve it to where there's a potential something could go back railroad-wise. They even have the old trestles and all. Yes, ma'am.
And I had put my daughter in Bright Springs when she got old enough to go to school, and you know, Bright isn't too far from Foxside.
Okay, Brian, sure, yeah.
And so there'd be times when we needed to go to we'd go back way through Foxside.
Uh-huh.
And used to, there's like an overpass deal, bridge that you could used to see some the train tracks there, and at some point they finally tore those up and got rid of them.
I know what you're talking about. It's the old Rock Island,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
they
that's
went
what
in
I'm
to
saying.
service the aluminum, Alcoa
Yeah.
and bauxite area.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the old Rock Island. I know that bridge you're talking about.
They
Yep.
are coming back with wanting some railroads in Fort Worth, Dallas.
Yes,
They're finding that they just can't keep making the roads wider
right,
for the volume of cars.
yes.
So they wanted to make more of a Metroplex commuter train. I don't know, they've done some small bits of it, but I don't think it got to Fort Worth. They wanted it to go all the way from Fort Worth to Dallas.
It does.
Have they got it?
Yeah,
going
there's
now
the
yet?
Trinity Railway Express, and then there's the Dallas Area Rapid Transit, DART and TRE.
Yeah, I remember the
So,
dark.
yes, they've got it, and they're still adding to it. They're still
Because
adding to
there's,
it.
you know, too many people, there's just not enough room for all the cars.
Cars, right.
Yeah, you know, some of the larger railroads, like the Kansas City Southern, they did not want to go into Dallas. It was getting too
Yeah.
congested, so they built a big, huge terminal, Wiley, outside on the outskirts
Yeah.
of Dallas. They built a huge terminal, and then they deeded that property, or somehow it changed hands, to rapid transit, light transit rail. And so now that's perfect. So the rail infrastructure was already there, really. They hadn't abandoned it or torn it up. It's just being repurposed. And it's great. It's a great way to travel. And just to give you a little tip, you can go to Oklahoma City and you can get on Amtrak's Heartland Flyer, and it will take you to Dallas Terminal, the Dallas Union Station in downtown Dallas, right there by Dealey Plaza and the works. You can get on DART and go anywhere and see Dallas, get back on the Heartland Flyer and go back up to Oklahoma City. I've done it with my son. So it's a neat way to not have to drive and fight the Dallas traffic. I went through Dallas in a few months ago. I drove through Dallas when it was just getting dark in a huge rainstorm right through the gut of Dallas at rush hour. And I thought, this is insane. I'd rather be on a train for sure. Let somebody else do the driving.
We were hoping to wake up from the nightmare.
Yes.
But if
Tricia,
you
good to
want
see you.
train travel, go to Europe.
Yeah.
They have 200 mile per hour
Yeah.
high-speed trains
Yeah.
that will take you almost anywhere
Uh-huh.
in Europe.
Yeah.
And they're building more all the time.
Yeah.
If we could
Now-
just learn from them.
The United States does not have one single mile of true high-speed
Yeah.
rail yet. But they just did the Golden Spike, starting the LA to Las Vegas.
Oh, yes.
High-speed rail, and that's gonna be true high-speed rail.
Wow.
200 miles per hour.
200.
My son went to Japan and he said riding the fast train in Japan was just
The bullet
best,
train.
best part of his trip.
The bullet train, yes.
Yeah.
Well, we've known for a long time that having single passenger cars is very inefficient. In 1973 and 1978, we had energy crisis. I was very young, I was a young man, but the price of gas shot up and you had to wait in line at the gas station. In Japan, they had the Shinkansen, which was the bullet train.
Yes.
It's powered by nuclear energy, and they were completely unaffected by all that.
Ha.
If you wanted to go somewhere, you walked down to the station, you got your ticket, you went. In the United States, I remember waiting for hours
Oh, yeah.
in line to get 5 gallons of gas. They rationed gas during that time.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous, so we
Yeah.
should have learned from that.
We should have. We
One
should
of the
have.
probably biggest obstacles to building stuff like in Japan, like someone said Japan has the current record for the most miles of high speed per country, the country with the most miles of high speed trains. Europe has more, of course, that's spread out over
Right.
France, Germany, Holland.
Right.
Italy,
Actually,
all those
it's
places.
China has the most
Really?
miles of
These
high-speed
days,
rail.
yes, yes.
They've
China
got
has
something
invested-
like 25,000 miles.
China has invested big time in their
Yeah,
railroads
and we can
infrastructure.
go anywhere,
Yeah.
very economical, like from here
Yes.
to Little Rock,
Uh-huh.
maybe just $10, and
Wow.
then, and maybe just half an hour.
Yeah.
It's so convenient.
Yeah.
Well, one of the biggest obstacles of doing something like that in the United States is that you have just a huge diversity of terrain, but also population.
Yeah.
That's true, the individual power with the car, then how can we keep
That's it. I
balance?
think that's what happened in America. We were so fiercely independent, and we want to have our own car and our own roads and our own schedule. And so.
Well, we have private property. In China, the state owns everything, and if they
Yeah.
want to build a
Yeah.
railroad through someplace, you just gotta move.
They just do it. Yeah.
The government has the power.
Yeah, the government.
Okay, but it can be good, it can be bad, you
Yeah.
know, and the things change radically, like you said.
Yeah.
And America will come back to the best time again.
Yes.
Always. So I vote for Trump. If I can, okay, I have the green card, I cannot vote, but Trump is really doing good things, I think.
But that's not true in Europe. They have, you know, but people there
That's
want
interesting.
convenience.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
don't want to be tied up, you know,
Right.
with pollution
Yeah.
and so forth. They want convenience, and
Yeah.
that's what they've got.
Another big difference between Europe and America is that Europe was bombed during World War II, and you had to rebuild the
Right.
railroads.
Right.
And we somehow managed to avoid that.
Yeah.
So we didn't,
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but it's going, the high-speed rail conversion is going in places like Spain and
Yeah.
Portugal that didn't get bombed.
not as much.
A lot of talk.
I noticed they have a program evaluation
Yes.
there.
Yeah.
So do they give that to you, Nan?
Yes, no, they can just put it on the card
Oh, put it on the
here.
card.
Just fill out the
Okay.
evaluation. Tell us how you like this program. If you'd like other programs that are similar or just any subject, just let us know, because that helps us figure out what we are going to have in the future. And I'd like to have your card.
Yes, I've got my, if anybody wants my card, I have cards up here.
I have